Welcome back into the Wake Up Call, ladies and gentlemen. We're really excited for this next interview we got coming up. We got Hans von Spakovsky joining us, and he is the manager of Election Law Reform Initiative and senior legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. He's an authority on a wide range of issues, including civil rights, civil justice, First Amendment, and immigration. And here's one of my favorite parts. President Donald Trump appointed him to the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity in 2017, and he is helping us break down what is happening right now with Donald Trump and Michael Cohen. So it's an honor and a privilege to have Mr. Spakovsky on the program. Hans, are you there?
Yep, Baylor, I'm here.
Thank you so much for joining us so early.
Well, sure. And, hey, you didn't mention one of the best things. I'm actually from Huntsville, Alabama.
Oh, there we go, a Huntsville guy. I love it. I'm gonna have to talk to Chris. He didn't tell me that, man.
So that's how I was born and raised in Alabama, but have that odd last name.
Oh, perfect. I love it. All right, so I just want to break down and just jump right into this plea deal. So just before we get right into the nitty-gritty of it, what did you think when you saw this plea deal come out?
Well, what I thought was the Justice Department was very fortunate that they had scared Michael Cohen into pleading guilty, at least on the supposed violations of campaign finance law. And the reason I say that is because the theory under which they're operating, that these payments that Michael Cohen made and that Trump reimbursed him for to these two women to supposedly, hush up a supposed affair, that those were campaign-related expenses. Well, look, the Justice Department during the Obama administration tried to use that very same theory to prosecute John Edwards. Remember John Edwards, Democratic candidate for president? And if you'll recall, campaign contributors of John Edwards paid $1 million to John Edwards' mistress to keep her quiet, and at the time, she actually worked for his campaign.
Oh,
the
fantastic.
Government prosecution, they lost. And the reason they lost was that the court decided that this was a personal expense. It was not a campaign-related expense. And if it's a personal expense, none of the rules and restrictions of federal law apply. So the Justice Department, when they actually had to go to court once before with this dubious theory, they lost. Here, they didn't have to go to court because Cohen, you saw him. He was crying when he was doing it. He would have said anything in this plea deal to get what he got, which was apparently he's going to get just a couple of years in prison on 8 guilty counts. Compare that to what happened to Manafort.
Oh, my gosh.
Who the same day was found guilty also on 8 counts of almost the same thing, tax evasion and bank fraud. Those were the main claims. And he's facing life in prison.
100%. So I didn't know there was actually a legal precedent for this. That's very interesting to know that, going in, there is a case that has been adjudicated on similar grounds, and essentially it was found to not hold any water. So why do you think, everybody seems to discount Michael Cohen, but there's a reason he was Trump's cleaner, right? He's a really intelligent guy. So why do you think he took this plea deal, if you were to speculate?
Well, because if he didn't take it, and he went to court on, he pled guilty on 8 counts. Only 2 of them were on these campaign finance charges, which are questionable. He still had all these counts for tax evasion and bank fraud against him. And if he went to court on those, he could spend, and found guilty, he could spend a lot of time in jail. So wouldn't you, if the government offered you a plea deal for just a couple of years in jail, in comparison to that, as long as you say what the government wants you to say when you're in court, wouldn't you take that?
Oh, 100%. But there's something interesting that I thought about this is that he was, I believe the terminology was a non-cooperating witness. Like he was pleading guilty, but he wasn't, in doing so, agreeing to cooperate with a Robert Muller or somebody of that nature. What do you think does that have any bearing on the situation?
Well, I think what it means is that everybody who thinks he's got some fountain of secret evidence, I just don't think that's correct, and I don't think it's going to happen. If he did, and they were going to use him, the government was going to use him the way they used Rick Gates in the Manafort case, then he would not be listed as a non-cooperating witness. And remember, that's how the government, in essence, got Manafort. They turned his former employer, Rick Gates, and he was the lead witness against him in the trial. Although we have to say, in the Manafort trial, the government only won less than half of its case there, too.
100%. So I do want to ask you a little bit about the Manafort trial, if that's all right.
Sure.
With that, there was a lot of speculation that, well, I just want to start with what Judge Ellis said. Judge Ellis made a lot of remarks that made it sound like Robert Mueller was out of his investigative purview. What are your thoughts on that? Because a lot of people have said that Cohen, they believe that Mueller will try to get to Cohen, but it doesn't seem like Michael Cohen has anything to do with Russian collusion, which is what Robert Mueller's job is in and of itself. But am I misunderstanding that in some way?
No, you're not misunderstanding it. Look, through today, Robert Mueller has indicted, I think, a little over 30 people. And in every single one of those cases, every single one of those indictments, none of them have anything to do with any Russian collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. Every one of those indictments, like the Manafort one, for example, look, Manafort was only with the Trump campaign for about 5 months, and everything he got indicted for and convicted on had to do with his representation of the Ukrainian government many years before he was briefly involved with the campaign. So maybe Mueller has some secret trove of evidence that he hadn't revealed yet, but up until now, he hasn't put out a single piece of evidence on his mandate, which is showing collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government.
A lot of people in the Manafort trial, we talked about it extensively yesterday, and when we did, a lot of people called in and suggested the idea of jury nullification, because essentially nobody would have seen what was coming with Manafort had he not been associated with the Trump campaign. What do you think of the idea of jury nullification happening in the Manafort trial? Was that a realistic possibility or a far-fetched hope?
Well, look, there were 18 criminal counts against Manafort, and they did find him guilty on 8, but on the other 10, they couldn't come to a consensus that he was guilty. And I think part of the problem that the government had in this case was that their main witness, again, Rick Gates, well, when he was cross-examined on the stage, in the trial, he had to admit, first of all, that he was a proven liar, that he had lied on numerous occasions to the special counsel. Then he had to admit that he was an embezzler who had stolen millions of dollars from who? Paul Manafort, the guy he was testifying against. And he had to admit that he had actually embezzled funds from prior employers, too. And then he also was forced to admit that part of the reason he had embezzled that money was because he was a serial adulterer, and he had used the money to pay for an apartment and a girlfriend in London. So, I think the jury, while there was a lot of documentary evidence and enough for them to convict him on 8 counts, I think that particular witness raised a lot of doubt in the minds of the jury, and that's probably why they couldn't come to a consensus on the other 10 counts.
A heck of a star witness, right?
Yeah.
So now to the question that's on everybody's mind. So now in less than 24 hours, we saw a guilty verdict and a guilty plea. The next question, obviously, is a President Trump pardon. What do you think will happen in both cases, in the case of Cohen and in the case of Paul Manafort?
It's hard to predict what this particular president will do, as you well know.
Very true.
I suspect that his advisors are going to advise him not to give a pardon to any of these folks. Maybe at some point down the line, once Mueller has finished and all this is over with. But I think his advisors would say to him, look, there's just going to be too much political and media fallout if you, right now, while Mueller is still investigating, extend a pardon to these guys.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us this early in the morning. Even though you're not in Alabama time anymore, we appreciate you getting early and joining us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. You have a great rest of your day. All right, and again, that was Hans von Spakovsky, a manager in election law reform initiative and senior legal fellow at the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies, who also was appointed to the Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity in 2017 and is from Huntsville, Alabama.